The legal cannabis industry has unlocked generational wealth opportunities across the country. But the industry's regulatory complexities, constant state of change, and speed of evolution drive confusion for entrepreneurs and investors alike. On this podcast, we'll interview the industry leaders who are shaping the future of the legal cannabis industry to help our listeners understand these idiosyncrasies. This is Cannabis Unlocked, hosted by Key Investment Partners. All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to another episode of Cannabis Unlocked here. I'm accompanied here on the show today by one of our distinguished advisory board members, Sheldon. Mara's been with the advisory board for probably about 2 years or so now, I guess, with Key, and we're excited to have her continued involvement here with Key. Mara is a senior policy advisor for Squire Patton Boggs, and she's been super instrumental to just kind of the Key family, giving us, regular regulatory updates, kind of her views on the marketplace and what's going on, specifically on the regulatory front with regards to federal legalization, safe banking, et cetera. If there's somebody to talk to about rescheduling or anything that's going on, Mara is certainly our go-to. So Mara, without further ado, would love for you to, quickly introduce yourself, and we can kind of jump right into the podcast here.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. And thanks for having me. As you mentioned, I am a senior policy advisor, Squire Patton Boggs. I advise clients on cannabis policy and work with private sector companies and nonprofits on a variety of legislative and regulatory matters that are related to cannabis and hemp. Previously, I worked on Capitol Hill as a senior staffer for several members of Congress, also at the state level, and served as communications director and spokesperson for now Governor Jared Polis, but it was his first gubernatorial campaign that I worked on. When I worked at the House of Representatives, I worked for the late late and great Representative John Dingell. He was the chairman of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and that's the committee that oversees FDA and has direct jurisdiction on matters of commerce involving cannabis, CBD, hemp, and related products. I also work at Squire on the Cannabis Initiative team and oftentimes write cannabis policy pieces and guest column.
Awesome. So I'm sure everybody kind of tuning into the show could hear why Mara has been such a value add to the advisory board here. So, the past couple of weeks have been, I'd say, really interesting in the space. We've gone for almost 2 years now without like any major legislation or kind of any noise from even the White House on the cannabis industry. We still have the continued movements at the grassroots level or at the state level from grassroots movements, but nothing's really been happening. And then all of a sudden, Biden, surprises all of us with his federal pardon and instructing of, potentially rescheduling and having governors look at potential pardons as well. Can you kind of give us a little bit of background on what's going on today and maybe the significance behind that?
Sure. Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, the president did announce that he was taking 3 executive actions to reform cannabis policy. The first was pardoning, as you mentioned, all federal offenders for simple possession of cannabis. He also urged governors to do the same for state offenders. And he is directing HHS and the U.S. Attorney General to review marijuana's schedule as a Schedule 1 drug and its status on that. So currently they're in the process of working on that. There is no timeline, although they did say that time is of the essence, but they did not set a timeline for review right now. So with regard to scheduling, we I think in particular, especially in the cannabis space, feel that cannabis should not be a Schedule 1 drug. Schedule 1 drugs, to give you an example, are heroin, LSD, and ecstasy. So marijuana doesn't really fit into that category very well. If you look at Schedule 2 on down, all the way down to Schedule 5, the substances start to, I would say, diminish a little bit as far as the potency is concerned. So Schedule 2, for example, would be like Vicodin, cocaine, fentanyl. That's a Schedule 2, certainly much more potent than cannabis. And then Schedule 3 but Tylenol with codeine, anabolic steroids as well. And then then you get into Schedule 4, which is like your Ambiens, your Xanax. Schedule 5, typically is like your Robitussin AC, cough medication, things of that nature. So, I would say as far as scheduling is concerned, the higher the number, for the cannabis industry, probably the better. I think that it's great to finally be taking a look. I don't think there will be seeing descheduling, but I do think rescheduling is getting a much closer look that's long overdue. So I think that folks are really excited about seeing some final movement on this.
Sure. So interesting with regards to the different tiers of the schedules there. So it sounds like Schedule 5 is really kind of over-the-counter type medicines. I'm actually just not sure. Is alcohol in the schedule at all?
I'm not. I don't think it is, but I'd have to do a closer look to that.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine cannabis would be somewhere in the range of where alcohol is, if it were to be scheduled. So, I guess I have so many questions that come to mind when we think about what rescheduling cannabis is, because we've always been moving towards the idea that we're going to get descheduling and, open federal legalization, opening up interstate commerce, all that fun stuff. At what point does, let's say, for some listeners, they'll understand, for others, we'll talk about 280E on the tax code, which basically won't allow for any cannabis business to deduct their expenses past cost of goods sold. So giving cannabis businesses a very, very high effective tax rate. It's one of the biggest problems in the industry that we talk about every day. At what point in rescheduling would maybe we take care of the 280E problem?
That's a really good question. I think that is still to be determined. We're going to need to see where things end up as far as the, scheduling list is concerned. But, basically what I just shared with you, the fact that, you've got drugs that are very high potency in a Schedule 2 and 3, much more so than cannabis, is something that we need to be paying attention to.
Sure.
Long overdue. And, I think that it still needs to be evaluated. And I think the White House is going to, try to do a very thorough job in evaluating it, or reevaluating it, if you will.
Absolutely. And I would say you probably have one of the hardest jobs in the world, given that you are trying to pin the tail on the politician all the time to try to understand what they're going to do, or what their next move is, or what that looks like. So, with that being said, I understand that, all these questions are answered with, somewhat of a grain of salt. But, you mentioned that the White House said they want to move more quickly on this. Now, in politician layman's terms, does that mean quickly within the next 6 months, within the next 2 years? Where would you guess?
I think they've already gotten started,
Okay.
So starting to lay that groundwork and do some outreach and, talk to experts. So I think that they are already starting that process. And my understanding is that while there is no time frame schedule of, a deadline when this needs to be done, they are going to be working very feverishly to get this done, because of the fact that they know that it's long overdue.
Yep. That makes sense. So, kind of taking a step back to one of my initial comments there, given that now rescheduling is on the table, do you think that takes away or lengthens the timeline ultimately to a federal, full legalization?
Full legalization, I think, is definitely, going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 6 months, or probably even in the next year. I think that incrementally, there are other things that will take precedence, like safe banking or the Climb Act. There's different pieces of federal legislation that have been moving, that have been voted on already, that stand probably a better chance to do things more incrementally. So, I think that is where we're looking right now. And, in particular, the two I just mentioned, are top of mind, especially going into the lame duck session after the election. Safe banking is now passed 7 times in the House. It has not, had the opportunity to have a vote yet in the Senate. There are 3 vehicles for that to happen. One would be an omnibus or a minibus must pass bill. Another would be potentially where there's been a lot of discussion called Safe Plus. And that would be maybe a standalone. So that would be the Perlmutter bill of safe banking, and then plus potentially some additional issues to get addressed. And then I would say, Congressman Perlmutter does also have safe banking in the National Defense Authorization Act, another must pass bill by the end of the year as an amendment. It's in the House version. So there are potentially 3 vehicles to, get safe banking across the finish line. And then there's the Climb Act, which is very interesting and sort of augments.
Real quick, Mara, before jumping to the Climb Act, because I bet there's a lot of user or listeners that, are very familiar with the Climb Act or the SAFE, but can you just in layman's terms explain what the SAFE does, what the Climb Act would do for our listeners?
So sure. So let me start with SAFE. So the Safe Banking Act, which stands for Safe and Fair Enforcement, it would explicitly prohibit federal regulators from handing down penalties on banks who serve legitimate businesses, meaning that they could operate with safer, more trustworthy financial practices rather than relying entirely on cash. One of the primary benefits of the bill is that it allows entirely legal and legitimate businesses to access important financial services like checking accounts.
Sure.
And it'll also make it easier for them to accept alternative forms of payment like credit cards or debit cards. So it also will protect banks and financial institutions who do choose to service cannabis-related businesses operating within their state's legal and regulatory frameworks, because cannabis is still listed as a Schedule I drug by U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. Banks could potentially face penalties right now from federal regulators for serving these legitimate businesses that have legalized use for cannabis.
Right.
So, and as a result, many cannabis-related businesses have had to resort, as I've mentioned, to this cash-only model. It leaves them very susceptible to theft, fraud, and unfortunately, violent crime.
Yeah. No, we've been sitting around waiting for SAFE for a long time, just here at Key and the rest of the industry, and for everybody else's benefit. Not only does it normalize a lot of the banking issues that the cannabis industry has today, from our perspective, we deal with banking issues all the time. We have clients who are unable to invest alongside us easily because they have assets that are with a custodian who won't allow them to touch cannabis. We have institutions looking at the space that have decided to sit on the sidelines. So we think that from even an investment standpoint, that safe banking will hopefully widen the range of types of folks who are able to invest in the asset class, to actually give them an opportunity to put some capital to work. I would say all in, I would expect that safe banking will reduce the cost of capital for cannabis related businesses. So it's something that is finally feels as close as it's ever had of having a chance at passing. So, we're really rooting for this one this year, I think.
Yes, I think we all are, for sure. And then, I'm happy to jump into, the Climb Act. Climb stands for the Capital Lending and Investment for Marijuana Businesses. It's a bill that was introduced this summer. And basically, it'll allow state legal American cannabis companies, including small, minority, and veteran-owned businesses, the ability to access lending and investment opportunities that are available to other regulated industries. So it offers protections to financial lenders and government agencies that are tasked with promoting economic growth. And it does have 3, I would like to, if you give me a moment and indulge me, 3 important components in the bill. First, it permits public agencies to provide financial support to the industry. So if it were to pass, for example, you'd have the Small Business Administration supporting the cannabis industry, which would be great.
And just out of curiosity, when you talk about these, benefits to the bill, I'm wondering, is there a lot of overlap between this and SAFE, or do you view these as mutually exclusive?
I think they're complementary to each other. I think,
Okay.
in particular that Climb would help augment SAFE. So married together, they'd be great.
Sure.
So it's very interesting to think about them both as separate. I think they sort of go hand in hand.
Okay.
The other, two other things to highlight are that the Climb Act provides protective services to providers looking to provide services to state legal cannabis industry. And, some examples include like law firms, which I'm a part of, and accounting firms, and also, investment banks. The third is that it would provide access to public capital markets in the US, which is also something unique and different from SAFE.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would really remove a major barrier by allowing the US capital markets to complement the Canadian capital markets and allow those players to provide those services to the industry.
Right.
It's a pretty major game changer.
It would be weird to think that a company can access, an IPO through the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange, but not have access to traditional banking still.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
go hand in hand, really.
I totally agree. So if you had to put one in front of the other from an order of operations perspective, would you say it's, pun intended, I guess, safe to say that SAFE goes first and then the Climb Act?
Well, SAFE has already had, SAFE has kind of got the votes there. It's already passed 7 times in the House, as mentioned. There are 42 bipartisan co-sponsors, 31 Democrats, 9 Republicans, and 2 independent members of the US Senate who are co-sponsoring SAFE right now. So, I think those votes are there.
Awesome. So you think a high likelihood, huh?
Yeah, I really do. Climb is a newer bill. So, I think it's still being talked about a lot. But as I mentioned, I think that the talk is that it does augment and go very well with SAFE. So we'll see. I mean, it wouldn't be far-fetched that, it ends up potentially as part of that SAFE Plus. But,
right.
Only time will tell.
Time will definitely tell. So, we've talked about, what's most likely and what I think is a path towards incremental reform, right? SAFE, maybe sprinkle on Climb, and then get those 2 done. Rescheduling at some point in the next year, and then ultimately federal legalization. Our point of view has been that, let's just fast forward and daydream a little bit, that federal legalization is likely going to look somewhat like what the alcohol industry is, right? States have really taken it on their own accord to legalize cannabis on their own. They've kind of come up with their own regulatory structures, et cetera. We don't think the states are going to be eager to give up the way that they've decided to legalize. So, akin to, going to Utah, where liquor stores are state run and you have to have like a perfectly 1 ounce measured shot. And then you can go next door to Nevada and buy a 5th of vodka at a gas station. We think that cannabis is going to look largely the same, very, very, very widely between the states, likely how it's already being legalized today. What's your view on ultimately how legalization plays out?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there is a bill called the Prepare Act in the House that has been introduced that would really prepare federal government for legalization. Hasn't been introduced yet in the Senate. I think that's forthcoming, probably, if not in the lame duck, soon enough. But there are plans already being made to prepare for legalization.
Okay. So do you think it'll be regulated somewhat like that, or have you guys not had a chance to see the bill yet?
No, I mean, I think that it is certainly a good start. It's hard to know, out of the gate, how it's going to look, what it's going to look like. And, a lot of times you don't know what you don't know yet. So we're trying, I think, to navigate and figure that out a little bit better and clearer. I think that, once SAFE gets passed, Climb gets passed, you've got, some of these moving parts. We've got the president's, executive actions in motion. And then, moving forward, we'll see how scheduling goes. I think then we'll be able to have, a little bit clearer picture on things. It's hard to kind of, got the crystal ball in front of you going, okay, what is this going to look like? But I think that there are members of Congress who are paying close attention and knowing that legalization is potentially, a reality sooner than later. So let's prepare for it.
Wow, it's so exciting just to hear all that. And, with kind of coming on the back of all this positive momentum that we've had, we're now starting to see a lot of strategics who I would say have been sitting on the sidelines start to make some pretty significant announcements, right? So you've got Canopy really pushing forward their move into the United States via acquisition. You've got the MLB announcing a very major partnership with Charlotte's Web on the CBD side of things. You've got Uber Eats in Canada announcing partnerships for delivering cannabis. We've always been of the mind that when the writing becomes less opaque on the walls, the strategics are going to start to follow through and execute on their plans. Would you say it's fair to start to expect to see more headlines from strategics entering the asset class in one way or another over the next, tomorrow to 6+ months or whatever?
Yeah, I definitely do. Recreational cannabis could be illegal in half the country if the handful of states that have it on the ballot for this November are able to pass it. It's Arkansas, Maryland, Missouri, North and South Dakota. All 5 of them have measures on their ballot this fall. They could potentially join 19 states and the District of Columbia with recreational use. And
it's incredible.
It is. And currently, 48 states allow some kind of cannabis use, whether it's medicinal or, low levels of THC or, recreational use. So it'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds after the election. And then, as you mentioned, I certainly could see more and more of the strategics out there doing some really interesting creative stuff.
Awesome. Well, on riding the tailwinds here that we have in our sales now, and with a lot of what you just discussed, something that gets me most excited right now is just the capital markets protections, just taking off some of the regulatory handcuffs that we've grown accustomed to kind of wearing with regards to operating in the industry. Coming up on time here, so I just want to leave you with one final question. What gets you most excited about the industry kind of as things stand today?
It's evolution. Candidly, I've, been in this for a long time, early on in the process, and watching how this has evolved. Colorado just celebrated 10 years of recreational legalization in Colorado, and even longer with medicinal. The state has a lot of really good regulatory, things in place to ensure, that use is being done correctly in the right way. Governor Polis has been incredibly supportive of the industry, has led several letters on safe banking to leadership in Congress. Our senators have been incredibly supportive, as well as the congressional delegation. So I think it's just a matter of time, and watching this evolution and watching this industry grow and change has really been exciting. And to be, there early on in this process, for a brand new industry that has emerged and taken off the way it has and professionalized at that, I have to say I find incredibly exciting every day.
Yeah, well, we're certainly at the forefront of, I think, something that's about to break out in a big way. So thank you so much, Mara, for all your help, on the advisory board, and for joining the podcast, and for all the great work you do as a policy advisor as well. Should anybody need to reach out to you, feel free to reach out to me, or I'm sure you can look up Mara as well on our website and find a way to get in touch with her here. But thank you again so much for your time on the show, and looking forward to see how things play out over the next couple months here. Will be really interesting.
Yes, definitely. You and me both. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.